There's nothing like pulling a rabbit out of a hat in professional sports. And boy, oh boy, did the Edmonton Oilers get lucky tonight on today's very special They're Not Dead Yet edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special Victory Saturday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I've been on Locked On Oilers for a full season now. This is my third season with the Locked On Podcast Network at large. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download Game Time today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, I'm going to be a lot more rambly than I usually am because I am juiced to the absolute gills because the Oilers had no business pulling away like that. With 7:34 to go in regulation, I wrote down in my notes, my stomach hurts because it was 4-3 and I wasn't feeling too good. You know, I felt like Peter Parker right before he was about to get disappeared in the snap in Infinity War. And the Oilers finally caught a break in this series, and they were rewarded for the game they played tonight. So that's where we're going to start, the idea of capitalizing on luck. Second, we're going to talk about some of the decisions that worked out for the Oilers tonight, and then we're going to pivot to looking ahead to Sunday to Game 4 and what the Oilers can really start to build on in that direction. So to start, I don't want you to construe me saying the Oilers got lucky tonight as in they didn't deserve to win, because they outplayed the Kings. They had a decent control of the game. This was by far the Oilers' best game of the series. Now, were there problems? Is the penalty kill still bad? Yes, the penalty kill has been an unequivocal disaster. Has the defense been good enough? No. I think, frankly, Jake Wallman and Darnell Nurse are having miserable series. I think Evan Bouchard has had a harder time in this series than he did in the regular season. And for the most part, the depth just hasn't been able to make much of an impact. And in spite of all of that, and don't get me wrong, the Kings played well enough that this was a close game for a vast majority of it. I was definitely nervous and anxious for a reason that the Oilers were about to go down 3-0 against a team that has been really consistent over the course of the regular season and has been pretty even keel. And these games in this series, they've been really volatile. They've been really prone to swings of momentum, which I do think is interesting in the respect that these are two veteran-laden teams that have playoff experience. And you would expect something like this more from, say, a Montreal, an Ottawa, maybe the Devils, where they're going to ride the energy. They're going to ride the momentum of a given game. And because of that, they're going to be more prone to swings. And I would be remiss if I did not bow my head in appreciation to the hockey gods, because I do not understand why Jim Hiller challenged the Evander Kane goal for goaltender interference. So it's funny I say that because I was texting with Hunter Hodes, who I do Locked On NHL on Thursdays with on the Locked On NHL feed, and he asked me, why would Hiller challenge this? And the only conclusion I could come up with is he felt, based on the way his penalty kill has been in this series, the way the Oilers' power play is played, he would rather roll the dice on the 50-50 of the goal being taken off the board, yes versus no, versus the 1 out of 8 to that point on the power play the Oilers were. So from a game theory perspective, irrespective of the context, I understand it from that regard. Do you think he had enough there? No. I personally, I would not have challenged it, but I can understand from a game theory perspective why Hiller decided to roll the dice there. Because if they take that goal off the board, that entirely takes all the air out of the Edmonton balloon, and they're still down a goal. And that really would have dampened the Oilers' ability to mount a comeback. And I think it's a bit too harsh of a penalty on the NHL's part that you take a penalty if your challenge is wrong for delay of game. I think that's too punitive when we want our goal to be to get the call right at large. I'm not necessarily saying the NHL needs to mimic the NFL where every scoring play is under review, but I do think we need to give our coaches a little more breathing room as far as trying to get these calls right, because that play swings the entire game. And obviously Hiller understands the stakes there, and he was willing to roll those dice, and that's on him. That is entirely on his decision making. Again, you could look at it the way I did, as it's a vote of confidence in his penalty kill, that he feels that even if he is wrong, they'll kill it off. Of course, the Oilers, by virtue of the hockey gods shining on us for once, Evan Bouchard comes down, they score less than 10 seconds after that power play starts, and they're in the game then. You got control, you got the game feeling it, and you needed this. More than anything in the world, you needed something to go your way in this series, because through the first two games, you couldn't buy a bounce. When you needed one, Kemper stole one. When you needed one from Skinner, he let in a stinker. And when you are living and dying by the shooting percentages, it really does feel like it's out of your hands. It feels like it comes down to luck. And capitalizing on luck doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. We talk all the time, and I say it on Locked On Oilers all the time. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'm glad you're here for the ride. I'm sure you're juiced up as I am after that win. And I say it all the time. Luck is what happens when opportunity meets preparation. The Oilers came with a plan tonight. They were better on the forecheck, though I do think there's some work to be done there. They definitely did a better job of playing this game below the goal line, of putting Kings defensemen in difficult positions, of getting traffic in front of Darcy Kemper, which has been a real concern of mine through the first two games, that Kemper was getting a lot of clean looks at these shots on goal, and they're not particularly dangerous. So if you give, an above average NHL goalie, which Kemper is, room and time, more often than they're not, they're going to be able to make that save. The expectation for a good NHL goalie is they're going to save 91, 92% of the shots they face, and Kemper, by virtue of being above average, is going to save between 91 and 92% of the shots he faces. So you finally got something to go your way. I think the presence of Evander Kane was felt drastically in this game. I got on him pretty rough for the stupid roughing penalty he took early in the game, where he stuck his leg out and just tripped a guy. There was absolutely no need to take someone's legs out. The hit was fine until he stuck his legs out and took the LA King player's legs out from under him. That's just dirty. There's no need for that. But then he assists on the one goal. He assists on the one goal, and then he scores the goal that swings the game. So that's the Evander Kane giveth, Evander Kane taketh away notion, that you have to ride with those volatile types of players who are prone to the emotional outbursts. I mean, you watched I'm assuming some of you watched the Canadiens and Capitals game, and you saw Tom Wilson and Josh Anderson rolling around on the floor of the benches trying to kill each other. Sometimes these guys who play on that edge, they go over that edge, and it is important that you keep it within reason so you don't actively hurt your team. But when Evander Kane makes the plays he makes, you're more inclined as a coach to let him take the one stupid penalty every now and then. Granted, you probably don't want to do that in a series where your penalty kill is at like 57% for the series. That's just not going to fly. I do think the officials have been a little harsh on the Oilers, and granted, some of these have been stupid penalties where there's no excuse, you just can't do that. But then again, some of them are like the Jake Wallman delay of game, which wasn't a delay of game, and the bench minor for reviewing that, because that should have never been called in the first place. But really good win for the Oilers tonight, capitalizing on a situation that was looking pretty dire. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. And when we come back, we're going to revisit some of the decisions Kris Knoblauch made in this game that ultimately worked out for him and the Oilers. So be sure to stick around. Did you know your Fire TV also doubles as an Xbox? You can turn any TV into a gaming and entertainment hub with a Fire TV Stick 4K device, no console required. grab a paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles like EA Sports College Football 25. If you're like me, you spent a lot of your 2024 grinding that out in Dynasty mode, or Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which got me back in on Call of Duty for the first time in a few years, just as easily as you stream any of your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus Max, Hulu, and so many more. Play high-quality Xbox games at the fraction of the cost of a console, or if you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device is easier to travel with, allowing you to take your games on the go. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Victory Saturday edition of Locked On Oilers, and man, they needed that. I hate to sound like a dad standing on the porch as it rains in the middle of the summer, referring to the lawn, but the Oilers needed that game. The Oilers needed that game so badly if they wanted to make this a series, because it is worlds apart between being down 3-0 versus 2-1. We talked about it on yesterday's show, the notion of a series doesn't really begin to take shape until a home team loses a game. You are seeing in this year's playoffs in particular, home ice advantage is bearing a little more valuable than it has in years past. Whether or not that is a commentary on the quality of teams this given season or something material that has changed in gameplay, we won't know until we get a little deeper in the playoffs and we see how much home ice matters. In the first round last year, I believe it was 8-2 or 9-1 in the first round. I think the only round actually where home ice advantage was a negative, where it wasn't worth more in the playoffs, was the conference final, where both of the teams with home ice advantage in the conference final actually lost, the Rangers and the Stars, of course, in last year's conference final. So with that in mind, some of the decisions that Kris Knoblauch made in this game were interesting. I said on yesterday's show, I probably wouldn't have gone to Calvin Pickard because I was thinking a little bit more in terms of the rest of the series, the rest of the playoffs. I do worry about what happens when and if they do decide to go back to Stuart Skinner, at what point they would consider doing that, what the environment is, because last year in the playoffs, of course, you gave Pickard 2 starts and then you went back to Skinner, but you did end up winning game 6 and 7 with Skinner in net. So you have to consider that as well. But right now, as you sit here, Pickard played just well enough. It wasn't beautiful. I wouldn't say he should have had any of those Kings goals. I would venture to say he played about as well as you can expect from somebody who is effectively a journeyman backup that is being pressed into starting duty because the coach just does not have a great feeling as far as his starter. I do think there is some merit to the notion that teams play better in front of their backup goalie, that they understand there's a little bit more of an increased responsibility to make their goalie's life easier, to put that guy in a position where he's going to have to only do the bare minimum. The Oilers were definitely better defensively tonight. I wouldn't say they were great. I wouldn't say they did a tremendous job, but I would say they were better. The high danger chances were, I wouldn't say kept to a minimum, but to only give up 8 over the course of 3 periods, I can live with that. The Oilers generating 12-8 advantage in high danger chances is enough that it will make a difference, especially when you consider the quality of player that is going to be generating those high danger chances. I will say there were some things that Kris Knoblauch did in this game I found really, really curious. The Oilers started the game with McDavid and Draisaitl together. That's what they had at morning skate. It's what they had during line rushes. It's what they had at the start of the game. They got out to the 2-0 lead. And then Kris Knoblauch opted to break them up. We went back to what we saw for good stretches of the regular season where each guy had their own line. Then the Kings tied the game. And then the Kings took the lead. And then we went back to Connor and Leon together. And then we saw them break up again. And we saw Knoblauch oscillating that on and off. And I do think, as far as lineup management, that does matter. Because I know, and I was saying this before in regards to Skinner and Pickard, when you're down 2-0 in a series, you can't be managing for game 5 or game 6 or game 7. You got to be worried about right now. But at the same time, Kris Knoblauch has to think about, well, if it's going to take all hands on deck for us to beat the Kings in 6 or 7 games, how am I supposed to get this lineup through another 2 playoff series just to make the Stanley Cup final? And I do think that is in the back of his mind, and why he felt the need to split them up to some degree tonight and use them a little, I wouldn't say sparingly, because they both were the Oilers' 2 most common forwards in this game by ice time. But I do think there is something to the notion that they want to try and manage those guys' minutes a little bit and try and split them up so they can be a little more impactful. Yeah, Connor 21-43, Leon 21-38, and then Hyman down at 16-29. You got multiple forwards, 11 minutes or less, and I do think eventually that will catch up with the Oilers as far as being a problem. But tonight, Kris Knoblauch pushed all the right buttons, and that was one of the real signature components of last year's playoff run, was that when the Oilers needed a gentle nudge in the right direction, Knoblauch managed to push the right button almost every time. We mentioned going to Pickard in the Vancouver series, bringing Broberg into the lineup, taking Desharnais out, playing Broberg on his offside with Nurse, promoting Dylan Holloway to play with Leon. There were opportunities and moments where he just pushed the right buttons, and some of that is just environment being strong. It's a little bit easier to get good results. Some people would classify that as lucky. Some people would classify that as being good at your job. When it comes to coaching, you do need a little bit of luck to go your way, because even if you make the right decisions, that doesn't necessarily mean the players are going to play the way you want them to or expect them to, because players are prone to highs and lows because of the variance of sports. But, excuse me there, I had to take a sip of water. I've had a stuffy nose. My allergies have been killing me. So I've been relegated to mouth breathing a lot over the last few days. And I've probably drank like 6 or 7 gallons of water in the last 3 days to try and offset the mouth breathing. But man, I'll trade being a mouth breather if it means the Oilers are going to play like they did tonight. And look, that's not how you draw it up. You don't want games to be played this way. But if it means the Oilers win, that is something that matters. And the one last thing I do want to get in, as much as Evander Kane can be a headache, a pain in the ass, a bad person, he made a real impact on this game tonight. And that is a real commentary on the state of hockey, where if you can provide enough value, the team will overlook it. The team will find a way to make it work. And for some people, that is a line. Some people feel that's unethical, that's unprincipled, and you shouldn't want to win at any cost. You should want to win within an ethical cost. But that's a different conversation for a different episode. And Evander Kane, Zach Hyman, I would say Podkolzin as well, those guys on the forecheck tonight, that was a real discernible difference, that the Oilers were taking what was in front of them. You know, you think a lot about the way football's been the last 2 or 3 years, where these high-powered offenses have been relegated to taking the underneath plays because defenses sit with guys high and back to keep everything in front of them. And that's kind of what the Kings have been doing, where they're making the Oilers dump the puck in, go get it, win it, cycle, and work for offense. And as the game's gone along, the first 3 games of this series, offense has been easier to come by as the game has gone along, because both teams have just gotten a little bit sloppy, a little bit less disciplined in their structure in pursuit of chasing more offense. So there is a trade-off, and I do think the Oilers, by winning tonight, have given themselves some breathing room. Not a whole lot. You don't want to be down 3-1 going back to LA, where they were the best team in the entire NHL this year on home ice as far as wins. You want to go back to LA at 2-2. And for the Oilers to do that, we're going to find out exactly how in our final segment of today's show. Be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where you've got your team covered every day. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you have never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy, it's all next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. I have been extremely fortunate to go to quite a few memorable NHL playoff games. I went to the Barclay Gaudreau game, game 2 of the conference finals last year. I was at the Marty St. Louis game against the Montreal Canadiens in 2014. I have seen some really incredible moments, and there's nothing like it. If you have the opportunity, you have got to hit up Game Time. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost up front. There are no surprise fees at checkout. My personal favorite feature of the Game Time experience is the panoramic seat view, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. And with Game Time ticket coverage, you are protected. Whether it's cancellation, job loss, or their 24-hour return guarantee, you are covered. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. One more time, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Victory Saturday edition of Locked On Oilers. And I am exhaling through my mouth, unfortunately, ever so slightly. And this was not easy. This was not how you draw it up. But if you come back from the Serengeti wearing a lion pelt, they're not going to ask you how you killed the lion. They're going to say, wow, you killed the lion. And that's the way you need to look at winning a game like this. Because the Oilers were up the river, down 4-3, looking down the barrel of being down 3-0 in this series. And you found a way. And so often this year in the regular season, when the chips were down, the Oilers didn't find a way. And I am not saying this is the start of something special, but it absolutely could be. And that's why this is exciting and why this is important. I know I spent most of the months of March and April begging the Oilers to string some good hockey together so that they would have some momentum going into the playoffs and they didn't have to manufacture it out of thin air, because it's hard to just turn it on like it's a light switch. And tonight they were given an opportunity, and they did not squander the opportunity that was before them in this game. Jim Hiller rolled the dice on that challenge, and the Oilers seized the opportunity that was in front of them. And you have to tip your cap. Yes, I am still worried. Yes, the Kings do still have a lead in this series. But the Oilers are alive. The Oilers are not down 3-0. The Oilers have the capacity to win on Sunday. They just showed you they can beat this Kings team. They just showed you that this Kings defense is prone to making mistakes. They showed you they can score consistently on Darcy Kemper, and they showed you the formula. Number one, pucks in deep. The more the game is played in the other team's end, the more likely they are to make mistakes. Number two, you need traffic in front of the goalie. When you are screening the goalie, number one, you're minimizing their ability to react to the shot cleanly. So even if they are able to get into position to eventually make the save with the screen in front of them, maybe they give up a bigger rebound because they're not as square to the puck as they want to be. That bigger rebound, and Kemper gave up quite a few juicy rebounds in this game. The Oilers just didn't have that second wave of attackers crashing down. Most of those opportunities came in transition. But when you have those opportunities to make the goalie's life more difficult, you need to do it. You think about that Evander Kane goal. When the other team is playing great defense, sometimes just get the puck to the net and bash your stick at it as hard as you can is a good play. And when you are struggling to score consistently, you have to get to your layups. And we talk about that all the time in football and in basketball, and to some degree in baseball. In baseball, it's wait for your pitch, know what you're looking for. Some guys are off-speed hitters, some guys are fastball hitters. In football, teams have bread and butter concepts, whether it's a mesh, whether it's a wheel, whether it's some type of RPO look just to get the ball out quickly to try and get their quarterback into a rhythm. For a basketball team, they're going to have certain sets they like to run to put their best players in a position to run a play they're good at, whether it's a guard on a pick and roll or it's a perimeter shot off a drive to the basket and a kick out. When you have your bread and butter, you can start to build out the fancy stuff. You think about it in terms of walk before you run, crawl before you walk. The Oilers got to the basics in this game: dump, chase, retrieve, cycle, work, grind. Then, as they started to get their feet under them, they were able to start building a little bit in transition and creating a little bit off of the rush and started to make the Kings a little more uncomfortable. And that's one of the keys to winning in the playoffs. You can't just be trying to score in one particular way. The more paths you have to victory, the more likely you are to win. If you're only going to win dump and chasing or creating off a transition, the other team's going to shut that down eventually. And this is not an easy way to play. The Oilers are not particularly built for dump and chase hockey. Hyman, Evander, Kane, when Trent Frederick is healthy, he's good at this, but he's very clearly not nearly 100%. His mobility looks really restricted. Podkolzin is good at this, but he doesn't really have the puck skills. Hyman, to some extent, is probably their best overall player when it comes to this the grinder mindset, but they don't have a ton of those types of players. And it is a hard way to make a living, banging bodies down low, throwing your body into guys at full speed, trying to win loose pucks. It is hard to play this way. It's why guys don't want to play this way. But if you are going to find a way to win consistently against this specific version of the Kings, you got to play the game over in their end of the rink, because as good as you are offensively, the Kings have shown they can ding you up. They absolutely can ding you up. When you think about the series Adrian Kempe is having, the series Kevin Fiala is having, those are two players who are like fourth or fifth in the pecking order in terms of best players on this team. And they have been the two best players. And you think about how Byfield was quiet tonight. You think about how Kopitar was quiet tonight. Deneau was quiet tonight for the most part. Those are opportunities for bounce backs. And it is imperative that you take advantage of home ice, that you keep McDavid away from their best defensive players. And then when you can get them out there, you want to try and make them play defense. That is the best way to beat the other team's offensive players, the best offensive players. Make Fiala and Kempe play defense, dump and chase on them, make their defensemen break it out, put pressure on them, and wear them down. But that will do it for today's very, very satisfying Game 3 victory edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please, please, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you are hungry for more, go check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night breaking down the games, Locked On NHL breaking down the biggest stories from across the league the day after. I will talk to you guys Sunday night into Monday morning after game number 4. Good luck, good night, and good luck. Edward R. Murrow, journalism. Good at journalism, Edward R. Murrow. I will talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.